Yeah, thank you. Thank you. He's on the panel too, Jahan, Kinetic Capital, for one of your key sponsorships of this second HandyCon. Also co-founded the HandyCon with me last year. Thank you, Jahan, for your support for the event and the community at general. All right. So we have another amazing panel, action-packed day 2. Fistful, you helped put this one together with me. You want to say some words?
Yeah, this one was kind of last minute. This was supposed to be a contrarian type panel. We were going to try to get Adam Curry and Brendan Knight to come and talk. Since they've been pretty public about Handshake and whatnot, and being on the other side of the river, being like in the middle or kind of against it. But they weren't available. We tried to get in contact with them. So we thought another good replacement for this would be the challenges to mass adoptions. What we'll face in the future, bumps in the roads that we could see potentially.
Great. So we got a lot of great stuff to talk about. So I think Fistful and I will just let you guys take it from here. Okay, and then of course questions and answers are welcome from the audience. I think that'll be a great part of this.
Can I start? Does anybody have an opening statement?
No, it's kind of open-ended. So however
I actually love kind of fudding Handshake from the developer perspective. Coming from like several years as a Bitcoiner and sort of thinking that like altcoins are things that don't work and now working on one. When anybody asks what the obstacles are that Handshake faces, the easiest thing to do is go find all the blog posts that Brantley Milligan has ever written, because he enumerates them. And they're pretty simple. Like, why did ENS build on Ethereum instead of starting their own blockchain, which is what Handshake did? And I think the top 3 are collisions with ICANN TLDs, security. I mean, like, nobody can argue that Ethereum has less security than Handshake. We have like 3 mining pools, and we've seen the hash rate from all those pools go up and down in sync, which suggests co-location. We need more security, and like creating a new token. And what are the other things he's written about? So yeah, those kind of things like are real obstacles technically. And there was a discussion on GitHub where people wanted to remove the word experimental from the handshake.org website, which I'm against. The word experimental is still on bitcoin.org and even on the Bitcoin Core GitHub. And I think there's a lot of things that we don't know about Handshake yet and what's going to happen to it. Yeah. What do you think, JJ? What do you think about like the hash rate and the actual security, and like when in your last talk you said that Handshake's a success, but would you still consider it an experiment?
Yeah, I would still consider it an experiment. And I mean, whatever is happening with the mining pool, this is what I like about proof of work versus proof of stake. Is proof of stake. All right, actually, I should start with proof of work. Proof of work obviously can get centralized. It's happened on Bitcoin. There's been mining pools that have controlled 51% on Bitcoin before. Ghash in 2014 had over 51% hash rate. So a lot of people may see that as a shortcoming of proof of work. But with proof of stake, the centralization is coming from within as a protocol rule. Like you need to follow this cabal of signers, and you need to tell the client which group of signers to follow. So it's not short-lived like it is on proof of work systems. And I feel like those mining empires, they come and go, like, and they've come and gone on Bitcoin. Like, I think Ghash is still around. It was a big mining pool back in the day, but now it's like, I think it's like single digits percentage hash rate. Like, and then before that there was like DeepBit really early on. They mined like most of the blocks, so like early on in the Bitcoin blockchain, and now nobody's ever heard of them.
Even on Handshake, we had 6 block, which like surprised most of us right off the bat with like a huge amount of hash rate, and I don't think they even have 1% anymore.
Yeah, so I feel like, yes, centralization is a problem on proof of work, but the lovely thing about proof of work is that it is permissionless. Anybody can join the network and start mining, and it's not, it's a truly permissionless system. And I think those mining empires, like, they come and go. So it is a problem, but I think it's a temporary problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like it's permissionless and anybody can start mining, but they do need to buy a $4,000 piece of hardware from one single company that makes all of our ASICs. And if they're sold out, then you can't.
Or they need to come up with a new hardware optimization that other hardware company hasn't thought of.
Right. Which props to you guys for picking a proof of work algorithm that was easy to make an ASIC for, but had no ASICs yet. I think that was smart. But what we need to happen is to have a second manufacturer and more mining pools. And I don't think that'll happen until we add value to the system, until Handshake's so exciting and valuable that someone's like, we need to compete with Gold Shell. They're eating our lunch, and then we'll really be heading to the moon.
I don't think there's going to be any competition in this space until as you said, there's more value in this space. And, I think that it's just such a challenge. I mean, I can't really speak anything to the technical side because I'm not technical, but from the business side or from the investment side, I think one of the biggest challenges is actually getting the attention of investors. I mean, now that might sound super lame in a kind of a very decentralized kind of community, but the fact is that I think Kinetic is still probably the most active VC in Handshake, which is terrible because we really need more activity. And it's great that so many developers are spending their own time, but they need to be able to graduate into, a seed round, a Series A. They need to be able to actually kind of grow. And I think that until we actually, reach back out to some of the initial investors in Handshake, get them, educated and interested and invested again, not just in money, but in time and belief and passion and community, we're going to be in this kind of, running in circles a little bit. The technology will be great, but the adoption will kind of suffer. So I'll just throw that out there. I'd love to hear what you guys think about the kind of maybe the dirty side, which is like the money side of the protocol, but it's kind of necessary in my mind.
Yeah, jump in here and from like a, kind of a builder perspective, kind of on that. I mean, we've seen like over the past year or two that, there's been a ton of great new, proof of concept products built on top of Handshake, and there's a lot of progress in that regard and experimentation. But in terms of adoption, to get back to what you were saying, John, about the business side of it, I think a lot of the for adoption, for newcomers to come in and to see kind of the value and to try to take some of that, get some action and skin in the game in terms of the new technologies being developed. They have to kind of see that these products that are being built are sustainable and they're not just ephemeral. Like in terms of a business perspective, if you want to integrate with Handshake somehow, having a product that you can trust is not just some little bitty side project, and that's something that could be reliable in terms of enterprise use, for example. I think that's probably one of the biggest next steps in that regard. So seeing some of these projects and stuff that are being built around Handshake, to get to that next step, I think there's got to be a lot more, like you said, maybe some investors coming in to support that kind of development, or just generally having a lot larger of a developer base to begin with. But yeah, I think that's probably the next step in getting towards that adoption.
I think. Go ahead, John. Okay, fine, I'll go. I was going to bring up the fact that, like, by design, the founders, and we have two of them here, so I'd love to hear Andrew and JJ talk about this. You guys raised money, you gave it all away. That I don't know any other blockchain project that's ever done that. If you had kept $1 million, we could have had a team of 10 developers for the first year working full time on Handshake, or 5, whatever it is, with healthcare. So part of the design of the project was that it was not going to be another scam coin that everybody sees as just kind of like corporate backed and with a marketing department. And I get messages from people on Telegram every single day that, like, oh, I'm a YouTuber and for $1,000 I'll mention you, or like, we're an exchange and our listing fees are this. And the best part is, I'm like, we don't have any money. So, like, I don't care if you're real or a scam, like, you're talking to a rock here. I can't, So I love that about Handshake, but like, that is an obstacle that you guys put into the system intentionally.
Yeah, that was very intentional. Like, we didn't want this coin to be like another foundation coin. It's a point of centralization, and it's also like a huge source of drama. It's been a huge source of drama, and like any coin you could look at, it is a huge source of drama in Bitcoin. It's a huge source of drama in Ethereum, and then it's just a giant point of centralization. So it's like, the downside is you maybe can't iterate as fast because you can't just like pay some developers to do something to try to get adoption or whatever. But it's the price you have to pay if you want to be more decentralized.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of the challenge too, is to make sure that in trying to get towards that adoption and try to build out something on a larger scale, that you don't and unintentionally go the route of just re-centralizing everything and on a higher layer of the network topology, because then it kind of invalidates the purpose of the underlying blockchain. But I mean, given enough competition in the space, that should be unavoidable. But at such early stage, it's hard to see that properly play out.
So I do have a question for Jihan, and then a question for everyone. But for Jihan, so the funny thing is, like, I think last year I was like, I also noticed, like, hey, like, original Handshake investors aren't really super active. We should reach out to them, get them more involved, help us push some things. And then the thing that really held us back from doing so is, like, how can they specifically help? Like, do you kind of have an idea of, like, how you would love to see, like, Sequoia or someone come in and, like, what specific action they can take to help Handshake?
Sure. I mean, I'll tell you what we do, and maybe that'll give you some idea of what much larger kind of storied firms can do. I mean, so for example, we instead, not only did we pay for the Handshake Hacker House, but we thought of it, right? We initiated the entire thing just because we wanted some type of, like, hacker activity to kind of focus on Handshake. Mike and I created this HandyCon, right? So there are so many things that can be done. We were behind, like, we formed with Chango and with Tieshan, the DWeb Foundation, simply because in order to get listed on exchanges, you have to face, the exchange has to face an entity. And there's no entity that they could face in order to actually put in the application. So that was one of the major roadblocks in order to actually get listed on an exchange. So there's all these different kind of things that actually require a proper business face. So the decentralized aspect in the beginning is beautiful and amazing, but it doesn't scale. And it doesn't solve some of the very kind of practical and tactical issues that growing a protocol in 2022 requires. None, the least of which is definitely funding and developer time and all these things. So I just think that the way that you guys designed it is amazing. I just wonder, like, what else do we need in 2022 to actually make sure that someone doesn't just fork this, commercialize it, relaunch it, get $100 million of funding or $50 million of funding or whatever, and actually drive it forward. Obviously, it would have a different type of that would be like unstoppable domains or whatever. But I feel like we're just in a different phase, And, for me, and I might be wrong, it just requires potentially a different type of approach in order to get it from, where we are to where we all want it to go. So there's a lot that they can do. It's influence, it's exposure, it's education, it's funding, it's developers, it's the entire ecosystem. I'm not saying investors are the only solution, right? But they're a catalyst.
Yeah, I think the point I'm trying to drive, I'm trying to really clarify on is like, what is like a specific action we can ask them on instead of, hey, we want you to get more involved in Handshake.
I don't actually
and then up to them to figure it out. Right?
They just need to be engaged. When I talked to some of the early investors, because I did this with you last year, I went around to some of the early investors like, hey, you invested in Handshake. Whatever happened to that? Part of the challenge was that so many of them invested only got like us. We only got like 50K, I think, in the round. And I think the largest allocation was like 300K, and that was maybe to Andreessen or something like this. I don't know, but it was low hundreds, I think. And that out of like several. What's that?
Might have been Founders Fund.
I think the highest was 1.5. Maybe
1.5 million.
Yeah.
Really? Then those guys should be involved. That's a huge.
Yeah, but that is a question for us. I mean, because like to Matt's point, we just donated all the money anyway, right? So basically, I mean, there is a question, and it goes from the last panel, like what are some things that we could have done differently? Maybe we could have just raised more and donated more, I mean, and maybe, well, but to your question, do you think VCs, if they had like, instead of 50 or, if everybody had, 10 or some order of magnitude more, higher allocation, I do think at the time that there was demand for it. That I mean, we could have probably raised it and inverted, but like, do you think the behavior of these institutions or firms would be
100 million %? Like a VC's time is weighted by the size of their investment. If they have a $200 million fund and their investment size.
Did he cut out?
I think we might have lost Jihan for a second, but I think we can be able to tell where he was going with that, right? If a fund had a $200 million investment, then they're more inclined to put in another 1 million to profit off that.
Yeah, that's a consideration. I mean, there's something. I mean, I think we did. I mean, it wouldn't have really mattered to us because or I guess the biggest benefactor would have been the nonprofits who would have gotten more money, so they would have donated more. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of an experimental its own, like the Silicon Valley experiment.
Yeah.
I think that applies to the airdrop and the reserved names too. Like, there's 180,000 popular open source developers that could also be looking at it. To Jihan's point, like the same way. Like, oh, I'm invested in Handshake. I woke up one morning and I just happened to be invested in Handshake, and 99% of those developers don't know that they have an airdrop or haven't claimed. And maybe that, and that doesn't expire like the reserved names. There's still time to try to find those developers and see if they're interested, if they still have their private key.
Although I do think the RSA 1024 keys do expire if the miners activate the software.
Right. I thought that was just the DNSSEC. Is that?
It applies to the airdrop too.
Oh, okay.
So then on the point of this panel again, it's like Handshake challenges to mass adoptions. I think a really natural question for everyone is really like, what do you guys think are the largest blockers to Handshake's adoption right now, right? There's massive lists. Jihan was talking about we gotta get VCs involved to do this, but like specifically, what are the blockers to adoption? And then we can kind of brainstorm like specific solutions to those blockers, right? So to some obvious ones, don't mention coin listing and don't mention browser adoption, because those are like.
What was the second one? Coin listing and the second one?
Coin listings and browser adoption, right?
Don't mention those. Like,
the reason I say don't mention those is because beyond for coin listing, beyond submitting like a coin listing application, there's not really much action you can take there, right? Like Coinbase, just for context, like their coin listing process is so opaque that like even people in the coin listing teams don't know what coins are going to be listed.
No, I hate to say it, it's actually investors that push coin listings. Like that's how coins get listed. You have the team, and then you have the investors who actually help apply and help go behind the scenes and like, hey, we really believe in this, and there's all these other investors who really believe in this too, and if you list this, then we would love to trade it, we would love to support it, and that kind of stuff actually works. Part of the application process, they look who invested in it and who's active. So, yeah.
The obstacle that I see, like you mentioned, browser adoption. Like the nice thing about if like Brave integrates Handshake is that all those users will just suddenly have Handshake without realizing it. But the obstacle that we have is installing something, or if Opera turns out to be the only major browser. I mean, right now we have a browser. It's called Beacon, and there's maybe 1,000 people who have it installed. So the problem with all this decentralized stuff is convenience. Convenience is always the enemy of decentralization, and the whole cypherpunk thing. We fight against convenience, and we always lose. It's the same thing with Bitcoin too. Like if I want to send you Bitcoin, are you going to sync your full nodes that you can trust the payment and blah 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 and use Bitcoin? No, you're going to open a Coinbase account. Your money's not going to go to you at all. And yeah, so convenience is a big problem. And just and then content, which is why we want to do this Handshake website race. Have some websites on there so that when you go say, hey, I'm really into Handshake and you should check it out. You should install Fingership. You should install Beacon. And then like, okay, cool, I did that. Now what URL can I type in? And it's like, there's like a couple. So that's important too.
Yeah, I think on the convenience aspect of it, it's hard to reconcile that. Like as a early adopter of something like this, and if you're developing something, you really, I mean, the main goal is to try to bring people in by offering an abstracted kind of onboarding process to the whole ecosystem, right? But you have to kind of reconcile that with your desire to not become like some kind of decentralized or centralized platform that does all sorts of all the aspects for them, and then you ultimately are just asking for the user's trust. And I mean there are some things where that's inevitable. I think for a lot of people, they're not going to be wanting to run their own DNS server, for example, or they don't even know what that means. So things like that, I think that's I personally, that's what I've been working on with creating like a domain hosting platform called Foci. Yeah, I think that's probably like the first, in my mind, the first necessary thing for broader adoption is to allow people a place that shows them a clear path to how to use Handshake, just on a personal level, and then beyond that, also allowing greater access for developers to be able to also integrate it like they would just a regular domain name, because DNS is kind of like the back end of the back end, and for most, like especially like front end developers. So you don't want to have to be able to need to reteach the entire system, and then whole base layer of all this just to adopt to this new kind of weird technology that they don't understand. So I think once there's like a proper base layer kind of services that are required that most people will not be willing to do themselves, I think it becomes a lot easier after that to build on top of that and explore the technology further.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like one thing you're really touching upon is kind of like the UX, right? For the end user and developers, like really poor UX. It's actually a problem with like pretty much every Web3 project. You look anywhere, compared to Web2 stuff, I mean, it's a very janky experience still. I mean, I shudder to think about like if MetaMask didn't exist, like what the user experience would be. But with that said, right, I do think there is a really unique opportunity with Handshake specifically for, even though it's like a janky experience and whatnot, right now people really care about learning about blockchain. And I think with Handshake specifically, there's a really unique opportunity to frame Handshake as even like a onboarding tool for no coiners into the blockchain space. It's kind of difficult to really understand, like, okay, treasury, decentralizing finance, why that matters. But DNS is so easy to understand. It's like, okay, you know what a domain name, right? It's like, here's something really cool is, did you know, like top level domains and whatnot. And then it's like, I mean, it's literally like my party trick. My party trick is to talk about DNS and why Handshake is so cool, right? And so my takeaway from there is, I think even though the experience is really difficult, there's a lot of friction in the beginning, we can frame it as a teaching tool to really onboard people, right? I mean, it's the first blockchain I learned about, and
I agree.
like,
with Handshake, it's kind of I think it's more. I mean, the technical side is not necessarily the easiest thing for someone just brand new to to understand, but from like a use case perspective, I think compared to other blockchain kind of projects, especially like DeFi related stuff, it's a little bit more down to earth in the abstract sense. And I think a strong part of that is privacy and the anti-centralized control kind of sticking points, especially if you can look at a lot of internet censorship in certain parts of the world, and especially now within the last couple of months with Russia and Ukraine and everything. There's been a lot more focus on in national news, international news about internet censorship and that kind of stuff, and Russia has been trying to get their own private DNS separate from the internet, which is a whole other topic rabbit hole to go down. But I think that, I mean, because of that I think that's it makes it a lot more apparent for why this exists. And I think to your point, that's probably one of the best ways to kind of go at explaining it to people.
Ukraine even petitioned ICANN to remove .ru from the root zone.
Yeah, which I don't know. That's kind of a
totally disagree. It's overreaching, but the Handshake does solve that.
Yeah, and then you get with Handshake, then you get your own kind of problems with that kind of stuff too. But that's a whole rabbit hole to go down.
At least Handshake might not be able to solve that now. I shudder to think what would happen if everybody in Russia installed HNSD and tried to connect to full nodes.
I welcome them to censor more.
Yeah, or given our hash rate, could the United States government just be like, oh, Handshake is how Russia is evading sanctions? They probably have enough GPU power in the basement of the Pentagon to wipe us out. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't really understand hash rates, but my source of truth is crypto51.app, and I'm just looking at numbers, but Handshake actually seems to have pretty sizable hash rates compared to even Ethereum. But I could be understanding this wrong.
We could talk about that really quick, because I did some quick numbers, and I think Crypto App 51 is close on that too. Basically, if you mine a Handshake block, you get 2,000 HNS. It's worth basically $400. Using the latest top of the line Gold Shell ASIC, it probably will cost you about $150 worth of electricity to mine that block. That's not even counting the $5,000 you spend on the device. So that's cheap, in my opinion. I don't know exactly off the top of my head how that compares to Bitcoin. But, if we were up against a nation state attack, especially US versus Russia, for crying out loud, it wouldn't surprise me to see a lot of transactions get censored or blocks being unwound.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't think the United States could do that to Bitcoin. Probably not Ethereum either. I don't know. Maybe JJ or Andrew has more insight to that. But
I mean, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I was sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna actually completely shift gears. So go ahead.
I was gonna do too. I just had a thought. It is something that we briefly mentioned. I mean, I think one road to mass adoption is sort of having a killer app. Like with Bitcoin, it was money or value or whatever you want to call it. You know, with Ethereum, it was like ERC20s and DeFi and NFTs and all this other stuff. But with Handshake, I think it could be like something as simple as just having like exclusive content that's only on Handshake. You know, it's just like giving normal people a reason to use it, and then they feel good about using it, like, or having some kind of killer app, like something that really draws people to it. Like that is one aspect of massive adoption, I think. And like all of the really successful coins do have like that killer app, that killer feature that everybody knows about.
Yeah, it took like for Ethereum, it took like several years before like ICOs became kind of a thing, and for Bitcoin, I mean, it was Silk Road, right? The Silk Road use case that really drove a lot of the adoption. Even though I mean, it's not the sustaining ones, and nor are ICOs on Ethereum, but it was kind of like the thing that like kind of drew everybody in those cycles, and yeah, I mean, I think Handshake, like things like that could. Like the world is kind of like in some kind of place where that kind of thing could happen, where some kind of really cool use case coincides with the world environment that we're in. But yeah, I mean in general, since it's like a mass adoption kind of panel, I mean, like I think like it took, if we kind of go back, like Bitcoin or Ethereum or like any of these type chains, I mean, they kind of like, it took quite a few years, like in the beginning, before like something like that happened, right? Like that momentum and use case drove it. And yeah, I think maybe Handshake is kind of like kind of going another path. But to JJ's point, like killer use case it seems like the timing is prime for something like that.
There's also like
the killer use case is actually the trading of the domains themselves. I mean, that is the most engaging, compelling use case. It's just that we don't have the infrastructure to do it. Like we have Namebase, but as much as I love Namebase and I'm an investor in Namebase, it's not perfect. And it's the only game, the largest game in town. And it's, we just need a bit more. I mean, if there are developers out there that want to build better applications to make it more friendly to, trade and collect, like collecting domain names, like that is the massive real world mainstream use case. Like Unstoppable proved it. ENS is proving it. And the entire, I don't know how many people in the audience that are domainers, but I bet you it's more than 10. And that's, for people that are non-crypto, right? So there's that. I just need to.
I mean, that is one use case, but that it does only apply to like a certain population of people who want to collect or speculate on domain names.
Absolutely.
It doesn't apply to just, your average Joe who.
Not at all.
Whatever.
Not at all. But you got to start somewhere, right? I mean, like you have to kind of build some type of traction.
No, I totally agree. But I mean, I think there can be like many killer features and many killer use cases.
Totally.
And
all else equal.
So here's an idea. Here's an idea for killer. So I spoke to Joseph Poon and got to meet up with him in Denver. He thinks it's a social network with handshake names with footnote, right? For me, I would say if the developers are listening, gaming is like a real thing right now, right? So gaming with handshake names. You can imagine like a trading card game where like emojis are like, let's say like fire type. You can think like Pokemon, right? Or like Chinese characters are a different type. And they based on, maybe the Niami rankings, you can have different stats and that are randomized and such. And then who has the best, handshake party? And that plays directly into trading handshake names as well, right? That'd be something I'd really love to see. I'd be playing that all day.
That's a great idea. But and I hate to kind of beat a dead horse here, and then I'll shut up. But it always goes back to this idea that if we don't have support, financial support for developers to actually graduate into, they'll never get past their first round. Like they'll never get past a certain point, because the idea that they're going to somehow, magically generate enough revenue to actually bootstrap themselves is like, that's not how, software typically gets built. Maybe you can thread the needle, but most won't. So I think that, it was a beautiful beginning in the way that it was architected. But if I'm just, kind of very pragmatic about how to move forward, we really need like the straightest line and most impactful way to actually jumpstart the next phase of handshake adoption, I think actually is to, get investors involved, because they're magnifiers, they're force magnifiers. And we don't have Handshake Incorporated to kind of do the work that investors will do if they're actually invested. If we had a company, they would do it, but we don't. So, either we have to keep going and hope the community can have the knowledge and experience and funding to do all this stuff that companies normally do, or we have to choose, some actors and try to get them into it. So for me, I would say, talk to your network and educate them. If you educate them about Handshake, they'll get into it because it's obvious why Handshake is amazing and beautiful, but it requires people to evangelize to influencers, like namely VCs and other people who can make a difference. That's how we got the Opera integration, same thing.
I know you said you wanted to shut up about the VC side of things, but there's one good question I think here in the chat. It's kind of relevant here. Maybe we can. It was directed towards you, Jayan. So from Colin Burke, he says, "What subsectors / categories within Handshake do you perceive to be the most ripe for VC investment?" And I think just generally outside of VC investment, just in terms of the road to adoption for anybody else.
I'll say something really, I'll give you a tough truth. I hate to say it, but it's true. I don't think VCs will want to invest in many Handshake startups right now, because even if the founder is great, even if the application makes sense, the overall sector is too much of a sector risk. Like Handshake is still too much of a protocol risk because there's not enough, listings, there's not enough activity, there's not enough interest, there's not enough backing in it. So even if the founder succeeds, and even if the idea is good, it could still fail as a business because it relies on a protocol which may not survive. Or,
Yeah, I agree. There's and that's kind of like one of the things that when I was first playing with Handshake and stuff, I was thinking about how does this translate into business level kind of adoption. And I think the answer probably at this point would probably be in trying to build something that works as a bridge, between both Handshake and the regular domain name system. Whatever, application that you're doing, just have, if you can, it's not possible with everything, but like, for example, domain hosting, if you offer both side by side at, one place where both domain systems can be hosted in the same place, or for example, with email, there's it's basically like a wall between both. You can't email out. Well, you can email out. You can't email back in to Handshake domains from like Gmail per se. So I think kind of bridging those kinds of worlds, I think maybe the best strategy in a business perspective.
So we are super running short on time, like 3 minutes. I would just say, if you had to choose one thing that you can just push the entire community to go in a certain direction to help accelerate mass adoption, what would it be? Like
content. Make websites. Don't just trade your names or accumulate names. Put some stuff up there.
Yeah, I would agree with Zippy. I think that's a good route to go.
I think short of having like a killer use case, like, complete censorship free, something which is, extremely, valuable and just obvious, absent of that, I would say, obviously, evangelize to VCs, like explain and educate them why Handshake is great. And then they'll get it, and then they'll figure out a way to invest.
I think going off the web content, just putting out web content, I think one of the easiest ways is at least for developers who host their own websites, just mirror your current websites on a domain you already have on Handshake. I think that's the easiest. You don't have to do much. You just add it to the server that you have as being hosted at both these domains, and then you're good to go.
One thing I'll throw out that hasn't been mentioned yet, just in the last couple seconds here, is Tor browser. Tor is another alternative system that users have to opt in and install something. It offers a content outside of the regular web, but it also offers privacy to access the regular web. Handshake does that too. Having your own recursive resolver offers you some privacy strategies. It also gives you access to this content you can't get normally. And so I think we could compare ourselves not just to other blockchain projects, but to other privacy and other browser projects like Tor.
Yeah, I think that's a good way that you probably, work on a marketing tactic around that concept too. Something's there on that front, but yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and then if I had to choose myself, it actually nothing technical. Really, it would be business development to onboarding. Like, what are browsers really waiting for? They want to see actual adoption usage. What we're talking about. I would personally just want to see like reputable brands who care about decentralization, just to reach out to them and like nudge them to mirror their website onto a Handshake name. Now you have that, and this is two birds with one stone, right? Not only do you get this adoption, but you also it doubles as marketing as well, right? If you, like say Internet Archive mirrors their website on Handshake, could be some good PR as well. So if I had to push everybody in one direction, it would be nudging reputable brands who already care about decentralization to mirror their websites onto Handshake. Cool. I think that's time. Thanks for letting me have the last sentence. And then, yeah, we'll pop out and move on to the next session.
All right.
Great talking with you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good.
All right.
Kinetic is a blockchain crypto investment firm based in Hong Kong and Puerto Rico. Founded in 2016, they were the first fund in Hong Kong and one of the earliest in Asia. With a portfolio of over 220 companies, they were seed investors in such projects as Ethereum, Parity and Polkadot, Solana, FTX, and of course Handshake and Namebase. Founder Johan Chu is an active investor and supporter of the Handshake ecosystem. Over 100,000 domains, co-founder of DWeb Foundation, co-founder of HandyCon, and sponsor of the Handshake House at Miami Hack Week 2022.